This is a message to all my supporters of this podcast. I'm introducing a new supporters program. You can contribute a small amount as a one-off payment to show your love for this podcast. Thank you in advance for all your contributions.
A payroll and HR company needs to be prepared for whatever's going to happen. You could say that over 70 years of experience helping businesses all over the world run smoothly is good preparation. But for ADP, that's not enough. To make sure millions of people are getting paid on time and in compliance, we're staying on top of each new piece of legislation. So when it comes down to it, ADP isn't just a payroll and HR company. We're the company that helps you navigate the complexities. ADP, HR talent, time, benefits, and payroll. Informed by data and designed for people.
This is the Absolute Business Mindset podcast. It is created and hosted by Mark Hayward. I am a corporate employee with an entrepreneurial mindset. This podcast will help and support you with new ideas about business. These are my thoughts, ideas, and comments. Today is a different story. This isn't going to be about an entrepreneur, but a corporate man through and through, and his journey through a corporate career onto being a global director. So let's hear about it. Hi everyone, this is Mark Hayward from the Absolute Business Mindset. I've got Wilson Del Socorro here on the podcast, and we're going to be talking about his corporate career, which spans different countries and different companies. So Wilson, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Great to be with you.
Right, so just tell me about your heritage, your origin story. So you were originally born in Philippines and you moved to Australia as a young boy.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So born in the Philippines, mum and dad, traditional Filipinos. But when I was a young boy, my mother moved to Australia to further her studies. Yep. She's an entomologist and also look for, I suppose, broader opportunities for her kids. So my younger sister is also in Australia at this point in time, and that's where we pretty much grew up. And at that time, this was the late 80s, a lot of, I suppose, Filipino, but I think other Southeast Asia countries were moving to countries like Australia to look for opportunities. Australia was a country that was really opening up to the Asia region. Yeah. They saw the opportunities there in terms of partnerships and growth, and one aspect was education. So we were very fortunate to have moved there. There are many people in the Philippines who don't get that opportunity. So in a way, that's helped ground me. I'm hoping that I still carry those roots and principles today. And we grew up in a small country town in Australia. There was 25,000 people then, 30-something years ago. It's still 25,000 people today.
So it is the cliched Australian
it is. Town. There are kangaroos around and all of that. But in saying that, Mark, you would think being of Asian origin, and this was sort of late 80s, early 90s, maybe in a small country town in a place like Australia, I may have felt perhaps a level of prejudice or anything like that. I can honestly say I didn't. The country welcomed my family. I never felt, in a way, sort of. I felt different. I knew I had to learn the English language quite quickly. I knew that I didn't look the same as everyone else. But many of my friends today are still friends that I had from primary school, and I've always felt that's really home, if you will.
I suppose in Australia in the 80s and 90s, they were an open country. Yeah. That's probably less so now. From what I understand, Australia's kind of closed their borders slightly more than they had previously. Do you think that, would you still have been able to, with the current system they've got now, would you still been able to have got to Australia because of your mother's work?
Yeah, look, what Australia is very good at is a level of diligence and thoroughness in terms of its migration system. I think skilled labour, the right, I suppose, skill sets and professionals coming in. Yeah. And so with my mother's, I think, specialty, we still would have. And yeah, look, absolutely, the last decade we've seen, not just in Australia, but I think in other countries around the world, this tension around migration. But what I will say is that migration and multiculturalism has really helped the country really grow. And we see that in other parts of the world as well. I'm a product of that. I hope my daughter is a product of that as well. So whatever the policies are, I hope, not just in Australia but in other parts of the world, we can continue to have as open and a reasonable border all around the world.
Because people are people when it comes down to it, aren't they? And it's being open and supportive and helping other people should be part of everyone's plan and the way they direct. So,
and it enriches our lives. I think we're enriched by having different perspectives. It's certainly, for me, having an open mind with my friends as well. I can see the value, I suppose, of the perspective that I brought. And we all grow as individuals and as society. So just following on from your early days, you did a degree in law and economics in the Australian National University. So firstly, where is the Australian National University? Yes, the key word being the middle word there, national. So it's in the nation's capital,
right? Okay,
in Canberra. It is an amazing and wonderful university. And for those that are watching or listening to your podcast, Mark, that have a know ANU or have been there, it's great. So ANU is in Canberra. That's where I spent my my education and part of my working life as well. And as you say, law and economics is what I studied.
Okay. So that's great. That was about your degree that you did in Australia. So your first role was government relations in a Big Four consultancy firm. So first of all, what is a Big Four consultancy firm?
So everyone, I'm hoping on your podcast, sort of know the Big Four as either KPMG, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, or PwC. And these days, the consultancy practices really cover advisory, tax, and audit, and hugely influential and obviously a big employer all around the world. Now, at the time, this was sort of the early to mid 2000s, they were really focused on audit practice. So what you've said there is my first role in government relations. It was... no one really knew what that was coming out of university, and you don't study government relations. And I stumbled into it as well, not expecting to have this role. But as I said, I studied law and economics, and I know I didn't want to be a full lawyer for various reasons. I love my economics as well, so I wanted my first work experience to essentially combine both disciplines. And I joined a Big Four with essentially no experience in accounting, if you will, which they generally sort of look for. They liked my legal degree. They obviously thought I had some potential to contribute to their business, but they couldn't sort of find a place. And there was this small team.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show. Meet the future of healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, meet the future of healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
In Canberra at the time, that was essentially advising corporates to engage federal and state governments on their policy issues, so regulations, taxations, government policy that impacted their business. And so this team essentially worked with them to talk to the right people in government, to talk to other stakeholders, to perhaps inform governments and others about their business position, and to perhaps create a conducive business environment that worked well for that business as well as for the government and its objectives. And so that's essentially government relations. And
is it mainly compliance with regulations, or is it like using a sort of American term, lobbying of governments?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Obviously, not all regulations is necessarily clear, and so the impact on society and stakeholders, such as businesses, there is going to be a level of conversations with government in terms of how do we comply with this, how do we make it operate, how do we operationalise this, and there is that point around shaping and influencing policy. So that advocacy, that traditional kind of lobbying, is an element of it. But these days, I would think of it as something a little bit more than kind of lobbying. I mean, what we have in liberal democracies such as Australia and here in the UK is an opportunity to engage in a conversation with governments on policy, and that's transparent. That's great. That ensures that various positions are heard.
So with freedom of information in the UK, so freedom of information is something that the government in the UK opened up. Early noughties, 2000s. So could I ask for a conversation with your multinational company and the UK government? Could I inquire about the conversation at a meeting or at something? How you said it's transparent. How transparent is it?
Yeah, so absolutely right. So anyone, first, I think as a principle, whether you're a business, whether you're an individual, everyone has a right to engage governments through your local representative, your local MP, or engage in the public consultations that come up in legislation. So engaging the various departments when they announce a policy, there's often a public consultation, so you can engage in that. And when there are various discussions that these government departments and MPs have, everyone has a right to get that freedom of information in terms of who they consult with through what is known as the Freedom of Information request. So you can do that at any time and with any, as an individual or as an organisation, and that can be requested.
I suppose, like, if before freedom of information, probably like late 80s, I'm thinking House of Cards, the original on the BBC. If you don't know that, Google it or put it on YouTube. It's really, really good. It was all quite cloak and dagger. It was all like behind closed doors.
Okay.
Has government opened up? Do you think government's more of an open business now?
Look, absolutely. It's a product of the times that we live in. It's a demand from the public. It's a demand even from the private sector, because we know that a government or our elected representatives who are more transparent, who are more engaged with society, are better able to reflect the values and the priorities of society. So yes, I would say that that's the case. There's also been a raft of regulation and legislation that requires governments and departments to be more transparent.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just flip back to your first role in the Big Four. So I think we touched on it, but I'm just interested. So I work for a Big Four, and I've talked quite a lot about working in the corporate and working in the technology area. But what was it actually like in a Big Four in Australia in the 2000s?
Fantastic. It was fantastic. So the 2000s, this was pre-GFC, so business was great.
GFC?
Sorry, Global Financial Crisis.
Right, okay.
The 2008 sort of crisis. So business was booming. If you'll remember, Mark, GDP growth was really the norm everywhere. High single digits to even double digits in some of the big emerging markets. And so coming into what was the advisory bit of this Big Four that I was working in, that was a growing business. Right. We know now in these Big Fours, they're in fact the larger part of the pie. The audit practices, the tax practices are smaller. Back then, it was the other way around. So there was a lot to go after. Right. And coming in as a graduate, I didn't have family, didn't have ties. Because of my Filipino roots, and I'm sure this is reflective as well in other parts of Asia, and you'll hear this anecdotally, it's the work ethic.
Right.
So I was in the office at 6:30 in the morning, finish at 11 at night consistently. and I just loved the work. And I didn't think too much about money then. And, it's in a way when you start off, it's not a bad principle to have in mind. I said yes to most things because I didn't know much. I mean, I know I spent 5 years in university, and you come out with a law degree, an economics degree, and you come from a top-tier university in Australia, you think you're the bee's knees. Yeah. You're humbled when you come into the workplace.
Good. I'm so glad you say that, because so many people are going to be listening to this, and you might be at university or you might be in your first job, and just to have that sort of counter story, because I know when I left university, I thought I was great. As you say, you get that humbling experience working in a job and doing a job for a prolonged period. The whole ethos of actually waking up every morning and going into work was completely alien to me and studying. So all of you just who are at that stage in your career or stage of your studying, just enjoy that studying period.
Exactly.
Because when it starts, work really starts, doesn't it?
Yeah, enjoy it, but also begin to exercise the muscle as well.
So you said about the long hours. Was that an expectation of the business, or was that just because you loved it and you wanted? Were you an exception to the rule in Australia, or was there a culture of long hours?
It's a good question. So first, the Australian work ethic. It's work hard, play hard. So there was a bit of that, but I would say that I've always had a quite a strong work ethic. I did that in my high school days, my university days, and I've carried that through to today. So I would say I was an exception. I was certainly probably one of the first few in, and certainly one of the last few out. Right. But it wasn't an expectation from my manager, who's now continues to be a mentor, and maybe we can delve into mentors a little bit later. And he is just a man that's always taught me about family first, and think about your health, think about all of that, and that's a challenge that I've always had. But back then, for me, it was about the experience. I think just getting that runway of runs on the board to achieve stuff, but also just that consistent way of grinding with work and knowing that I'm slowly building my skills and getting a handle of what it's like in a working environment. That was important to me, and I would do that over and above the 9 to 5.
So just consistency. Another thing I've talked about on my podcast is the ability to keep consistency. Yeah. And I suppose the question is, do you think do you subscribe that if you're doing 6 till 11, if you do that consistently over a long period of time, that's better than maybe someone doing 9 till 5 over a period of long time? Like, did it propel your career forward, being that type of consistency?
It's a good question. I know what you're getting at here. I think it's contextual. So everything in terms of how you approach work, at least this is my experience. And for your listeners, and maybe they'll get some value, I'm not sure, but certainly everything is contextual. So at the time for me, this was, I was in my mid-20s. Like I said, I didn't have a family, and it was just work and play, essentially. Okay. So it was consistency in just skill acquisition. I knew that it was my beginning of my career. I want to spend the first few years of that just building consistency around my skills. Yeah. And so that was needed. I felt that was needed, and it did accelerate my growth. I moved quite quickly within that organization. I was exposed to clients very quickly, and we'll talk about this later on. It's how I moved into a corporate. So one of my clients that I was advising ultimately recruited me, where I moved to Singapore later on, but we'll touch upon that. So in a way, yes, just that, I think that demonstrable work ethic, and not for the sake of being in the office to be seen. Yeah. It was, from competency comes confidence. Yeah. So that helped. Obviously, as you just get across your brief, you get across the depth of your issues and not just the surface level stuff. That shows up in your work. Yeah. It shows how you when you communicate. It shows up when your interactions with your clients and with your managers, who are ultimately going to decide in your future. As many of us would like to think, there's a lot outside of our control. But what I could control at the time was my ability to just, in a way, grind every day, reflect, introspect on the lessons, adapt, learn, because you're going to make mistakes, right? And I consistently still today, and that's great because you're pushing yourself. But that began to show up quite a bit in terms of, I became, I guess I got a reputation in the organisation as someone that delivered on their, the projects, that showed up well, that could communicate well, and that could, I suppose, converse, help clients with strategy, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think, I don't know because I didn't do it, but if I just stuck to the 9 to 5, I don't think I would have got there as fast. So those extra hours helped.
Yeah. Okay. So from a corporate career, something I touch on, and I touch on it as a positive rather than negative, is the word politics within the company politics rather than negative. Yes. So I view it as relationship building, and I think it's rather than seeing it as a negative that someone knows someone and that's influencing this, you should be thinking about building relationships with your bosses, with your directors, with your partners, whoever it is, to be able to bring on your own career.
Yes.
What's your view on office politics?
I'm glad you raised this topic. So, look. I think with any organisation, you're going to have office politics. In a way, it's the invisible thread or invisible part of business that you can't really put to paper when you're being hired. Yeah. You figure it out as it's there. And as you say, Mark, it's essentially the way or informs the way people are put onto projects, people are promoted, people are sponsored, and ultimately, therefore, a level of success within an organisation. I think it's hugely important, particularly as, in a way, you go up the greasy corporate ladder to be informed of it, to be aware of it, not necessarily to play it in any Machiavellian way, but it's for your own self-protection, your own self-preservation, and your own success to understand it. So, I manage a number of people in my team with my current role. I influence the organisation in a global way. And whenever I talk or counsel or give advice to people, this is one aspect that they need to be aware of. It's understanding how the organisation internally makes decisions, how promotions are made, etc. And like I said, you don't necessarily need to play it, but you should be aware of it.
Do you call it office politics? Because I never do, because it always shrouds with a certain level of negativity around it. No. You just talk about how to influence, persuade.
I think that's right. Very good. I'm loath to put labels on it because again, it's not one thing you can just pick up and talk about. Yeah. It's like it feels. For me, it's the invisible thread that connects what you do, how you do it, who sees it, etc. And it's just it's the way an organisation. I think whether it's a small business, an entrepreneurial startup, or a large organisation operates, there's always some level of dynamic. So I don't give it a label, but certainly I tell just reflect on a conversation I had. This week with a direct report of mine, it's having in a way political acumen or organisational acumen beyond your day-to-day work.
Yeah.
How decisions are made, knowing the right people to talk to, knowing who will make, I guess, who you need to sponsor you on this issue to get that project across the line, etc., and navigating and understanding that and being aware of it, because to my point, I think as I said earlier on, not everything, situations, leadership, influence, they don't operate in a vacuum. Yeah. So understanding the context within which you operate is an absolute kind of intangible skill that we all sort of you either learn through it naturally because you see it as once you start off, or ideally through mentorship and advice from your managers. And if you've got a great one, which I think thankfully I've been blessed in all my careers having very good line managers and mentors, either within or outside of the organisation, who helped me. So that's hugely, hugely important.
Okay, we'll talk about mentors, because that's something, it's one of my big fascinations. I think it's something that most people should try, whether it's informal, i.e. maybe your boss or your line manager, or whether it's someone that you pay for, or whether it could be someone that you listen to on a podcast regularly, and they could be a mentor for you in that way. So let's cover that in a minute. I just want to catch up. So you moved from the Big Four in-house. So can you just explain what in-house is, and then what was the change in the role from a consultancy business into in-house?
Yeah, and it's all by accident, right? Okay. As much as I would say this was all by grand design, Mark. So I was working in Australia at the time. I moved from Canberra, where I started my working life, to Sydney, and I got this large client who I now sort of work for, advising them across Asia Pacific and Southeast Asia.
Okay.
And essentially, my boss, who was great, gave me those opportunities. We talked about that before.
Yeah.
And so I was exposed to the client at a very senior level quite early. They flew me back and forth from Australia to advise them on a number of policy issues, given the sort of booming business across Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
And that was for a period of 4 or 5 years. And in a way, it was a job interview, those 4 or 5 years, because they saw my competence.
Yeah.
People began to regard me as part of their team in Vietnam, in the Philippines, in India, in Thailand, in Indonesia. And the regional director at the time pretty much said, this was sort of early 2010, said, why don't you just come and work for us? We'll base you into Singapore, and essentially you do this type of work. Yes, you can still work with your Big Four firm, because we'll still need the broader team's expertise, but we need someone in-house running it. So in-house being essentially moving from a Big Four, going into one of the clients, so a corporate, whether it's a multinational, a national company, but essentially going into the client, if you will. And the difference between working for a Big Four or in a consulting kind of capacity to in-house is essentially you're not only just giving advice and giving and letting the client make the decision. You're now the decision maker.
Right.
You're giving instructions to your consultancy what to do. You're providing the strategic perspective now within the company. You're expected to execute, or at least, ensure that you have the people to execute. Yeah. Your ownership of the agenda is through and through, end to end. And depending on your level, you're quite in a sort of a position of you're the only one doing it.
This is what I was going to say, because when I speak to people who have done this in my area, they say, actually, from the consultancy, where there's always someone to ask a question of, there's always a friendly face to help you along the way. When you go in-house, the buck stops with you, and it's usually a smaller team, I'd imagine. I know the sort of government relations in Australia wasn't massive at the time, but equally there was probably more of a scope that who could help you in the consultancy versus
you are absolutely right, Mark. The buck does stop with you. So if you get hit by a bus, they've got to recruit someone else, because there's a job that needs to be filled. So absolutely right. So that accountability, that responsibility is something you take on quite a lot. It's a different perspective. And there are pros and cons both sides, right? So when you're in-house, you're dealing with that sector, with that client, with their issues. If you're in consultancy, you can deal with multiple different clients, different sectors, different issues. So you get that range of experience. You are, I suppose, competent in a certain capability that clients demand, and they buy that, and you sell that service, if you will. Whereas if you're in a corporate, I mean, there is that part. Obviously, you're an expert in a field, but you're expected to also make a broader contribution to the end-to-end part of that business. So that's the difference. Which one do I like? Look, I enjoy being corporate. I've had the fortunate opportunity with my career, and this is in-house too, but certainly within corporate to flourish and grow there. The people are great. It's a global company, so we span all around the world. The current role that I've had has been through essentially, promotion within the company, and it's allowed myself and my family to travel and be around the world.
I'm glad you mentioned travel. So we've talked a lot about corporates and multinationals and big fours. So what was it like moving to Singapore? So someone who'd lived virtually all their life in Australia had built up a network, a relationship group within Australia. What was it like maybe the first couple of weeks and then further down the line of actually moving to a new country, new experiences, new people?
Pretty exciting, Mark. For as long as I can remember growing up, I remember. I'll get to this, but just for your listeners who perhaps have dreams of working, being globetrotters and working around the world. That was certainly me growing up. I remember watching the news and reporting from New York, reporting from Singapore. I'm like, God, these places are kind of so far out there, and I would love to work or to have a role where I could travel around the world. So I was being fortunate enough to have that. So first, exciting. Moving from Australia to Singapore. Singapore is Asia, but it's Asia light for those that know Singapore. It's relatively easy, and particularly at the time, coming in as I suppose as an expat to some degree, and the company recruiting me, that worked well. They genuinely looked after me and my now wife, but my partner at the time, so that made it quite easy. So the first 2 weeks was just, they put us in an apartment, and Singapore was just like, wow, amazing. And I don't know if you've been there, but the city is just this. It's small, but it's well advanced. The government has done a lot to attract the investment and to create a hub. So it's relatively easy. So the first 2 weeks was just a joy. And I don't think I worked for perhaps the first week. So I took kind of a week to just settle in. So we discovered Singapore. We also began looking for a house. So they helped us with an agent, so an apartment, if you will. So it was just getting the basics right, as well as preparing myself. And I remember when, before I even moved to Singapore, when I got the job, it was probably about 3 months before we actually moved. And my then girlfriend at the time, we travelled to Europe actually, just because a friend's wedding was in Italy, in Tuscany, and I was kind of finishing up with the Big Four. But still, at that time, I remember every day I was preparing for. I would spend a couple of hours a day. I had a notebook. I read everything I could about the company. I had a notebook and thinking about how I'd approach it, both functionally, so the content of what I would do, but also my style, my leadership. And so just getting into that right mindset. And that helped coming into the company. And knowing that they were my client for about 5 years beforehand, that was still, still what I think that preparation was still important.
So I recently moved jobs. I moved from one Big Four to another Big Four, but there was a lot of familiarity because it was a similar area. But to be honest, it was still a new company, and I had no exposure to the company before. So I must admit, I went in with my sort of eyes wide open because I needed to learn and understand the culture as well. But you had a bit of an insight already as working with them for 4 or 5 years.
I did, and I knew a lot of the people.
Exactly. This is what I was going to say. The people is often the key factor of going into a new job, because you've got to understand the landscape. So you already had those people and you understood them. So that gave you an insight, a sort of quick leverage into the company.
That's right.
But so how long was it till you started feeling that you could exert influence in that new role, in a new country, in a new industry? Although there was a lot of familiarity, there was a lot of differences as well.
You're right.
How quickly did you feel that you could influence? Was it the first month, Was it 6 months? Did you need to learn your role for 3 months? Because I'm just thinking that there was a lot of change, although a lot of familiarity. There was a lot of change there as well. How did you manage that?
It's a great point, and I'm thankful I had a really good manager at the time that guided me. So it would have been at least 6 months, maybe even longer. Certainly the first year was challenging. Not so much in the content piece of what I was doing, but it was, to your point, around influence, leadership impact, what we were talking about earlier, office politics, understanding that. Yeah. Now, this is a global company. Singapore was its regional headquarters. Right. All the big wigs, if you will, in sort of those terms around Asia were based there. And coming from a consultancy where I suppose I was doing very well, I had the reputation that I could almost kind of leverage at the time, and coming in a way, yes, people knew me, but I still felt like a fish out of water, right? So that took a little while, and well, I won't go into too much, but from a family point of view, it was great that actually we didn't have a child then. We've got a 5-year-old now, but that was also a transition with coming into work, knowing my work ethic as well. So you can imagine that first 3 to 6 months was just going in hard, going to work, trying to understand how it all sort of operates. So now it took me a while. So primarily around understanding how it worked, understanding what I needed to do differently. And I remember my manager, going back to a manager, and it was now still one of my close mentors. He's left the company now. But I remember him giving me advice saying, you are no longer a consultant. You are now in the business. Start operating like it. And, I unpacked that, thought about it. We discussed it further. And it was essentially stop giving advice and start owning the decisions.
Right. Oh, interesting.
Start owning the decisions. And when you're giving, a senior leader, the regional president or a big commercial leader of a country, fine, give your opinions, but you need to make a recommendation.
Right.
So you're still, I remember him giving me this, you're still in a consultancy phase. You're still not taking ownership of it. Yeah. We brought you in, so you can, yes, give us options, but also give a recommendation which one and how you're going to see it through.
Right.
That took a while.
Yeah. No, I can imagine that, because it's, you say, the advice that everyone in the Big Four give, it's all based on giving, you can give recommendations, but essentially you just give your client 3 different options, etc.
Let them try to.
So you just touched on your mentors. Let's just delve into that a little bit. So you said to me before that you've got 2 or 3 that you and do you still lean on them or ask them? Well, how does it? First of all, how did it come about? Secondly, how do you engage them? Is it a regular basis? Is it fixed periods? Do you catch up every quarter, every half year, or every year, whatever it is, or is it more a steady flow, just conversations keep on going as a, if I say friend, but as someone that's sort of helping your career?
Yeah, excellent. I'm glad you sort of raised this topic. First, before I go directly into that, I think the broader point that what you said before about mentor and what is it, why we have it, and its sources, I think it's hugely important. And for those of your listeners who feel that they may not have a mentor, I think the point that you made earlier about podcasts, books, articles, people that you follow, that you think you can learn from. They operate and act as mentors. Yeah. So anything where you can source information to help and inform the way you do things in, we're talking about the workplace here, but I'm sure other aspects, I treat as in a way a mentor, whether formal or informal. But going directly to your question. Organic, right? So the mentors that I've got have primarily come through the work that I've done, and in a way, I didn't ask them. I didn't formally go, "Can you be my mentor and let's do this?"
That's probably the worst question you can ask anyone in this world. Right.
Isn't it? And look, when I started working, I didn't think about mentors or anything like that. But maybe it goes back to what I talked about earlier: work ethic. My hunger, my commitment, my drive. people saw that, perhaps. But I've also been of a view that it's important to be open-minded, learn and be a sponge.
Yeah.
And so the current mentors, if you will, that I have in my life have been people that I learned from and I continue to learn from. And I think when you can approach it like that, when you can approach it with humility, you will yourself become a someone that people are willing to mentee.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
To mentor. I'm sorry. So I don't know. I think that's certainly for me, that's how I operate, is a sense of humility and a willingness to learn and grow no matter what. Yeah. So the ones that I've had have really come through work. So they've either been line managers, but also there have been a couple who have not, but I've interacted with them in my professional life, and they've given me a perspective, or we connected on one level on a particular topic, and we've just kept in contact.
Yeah.
And so, the people that I sort of see as mentors, it's maybe every 3 months we connect, every 6 months, but it's often not because we've regimented it. It's I have this intuitive kind of a sense of I want to just say hello and connect with that person. Important for me is having many associations or relationships, but held loosely, because you never know when they're going to be useful. And with the mentors that I have, it's that regular check-in on WhatsApp. Hey, how are things?
Yeah.
Or when I know they're going to be in town, or I'm going to be in their same sort of city, we'll connect over a coffee or a drink. And it's just having that connection. We have, because I don't know whether you've raised this in your podcast, but I think they also get a lot out of helping other people.
Yeah.
And they perhaps see sort of the insights of what the challenges that I'm facing in my workplace, or how the industry is evolving, and they can also get information from that, and it helps them think through the way they're dealing with their business or their organisation as well.
It definitely is once you've established a relationship, a little bit more of a give and take.
Yeah.
I know from the sort of definition of a mentor, it's one person exerting influence or education or knowledge on someone else. But I think there does come a point in sort of the relationship where, as you say, even talking to a mentor actually frees their mind up when they're thinking about your business or your area. So I think there's more than just the warm fuzzy feeling, I feel so good helping someone. There's actually more that they actually, the mentee gives you a sort of perspective that you might not have yourself on an area. Are they all government relations people?
No.
Interesting.
Not all of them. And I don't know whether that's deliberate design or what have you. It's essentially I've just been able to connect with them on a level that's worked for the both of us, for us. Because a lot of the challenges and why I go to a mentor is less so on the government relations or the competence or my job title and how I succeed in my job in terms of content. It's actually the things we're talking about here around leadership, around influence, around strategic thinking, around dealing with others, managing upwards, work-life balance. I had a great conversation with one of my mentors. Would have been, perhaps about a month ago, and he's in Asia at the moment. And I actually wanted to reach out to him because I said, "Look, how are you going? How's everything?" And I just there was a point around office politics, but let's bucket it around that. I said, "Look, I've got a question on this. How did you deal with this when you were in this situation?" And he picked up the phone. We had a chat, but then the conversation evolved to exercise and health. Right. Which is, he's in his mid to late 50s now, and he's prioritising that. And he said, I'm in my sort of mid to late 30s, and he said, look, this is what I didn't get right back then.
Right.
You need to get this right. And so it can evolve, and we've both found value in that conversation. So yes, not necessarily. It's less about the government relations piece actually, and it's about how you show up and how you move forward in your career and just how you live life.
So let's thank you for that. That's been very interesting. So you were in Singapore. You were there for a while, and you then moved back to Australia. So did you move back to the same office? Did you move back to the same people? How did that come about?
Yeah. So the move back to Australia after 5 or so years in Singapore was a personal choice. I go back to this point around travel. Now, I've talked about traveling as this sort of great thing. Look, it's not all it's cut out to be. I was traveling consistently with the role that I had, quite a senior role. This was in 2015 when we left, and I just was not at home. At the time, my daughter was 1 year old. My wife was in Singapore, and throughout the week, they barely saw me. And that was just not sustainable. Yeah. So, as I kind of grew up in my sort of career at that time, family became more and more important, and it is very important to me. So that's very different to what I talked about earlier on in my early 20s, mid-20s. So it was a voluntary choice that we made together as a family to move back to bring some equilibrium back to our lives. So that's how it came about. And interesting, Mark, I made the decision to quit, and the business was very supportive of it, and didn't know where I was going to go next. Oh wow! Had no idea.
But you just knew you were moving back to Oz.
I knew that I wanted to keep my family together. I knew that was and we all make these choices, right? But at the time, it was my family comes first, right? And I'm hoping that I still live that today, and we all have to challenge ourselves and be honest with ourselves. But certainly at the time, it was my family is very, very important, and it was tough. Like, Mark, I was riding high, right? I had a great salary. Singapore was great. We had a helper, all of that. And people who've lived in Singapore go, why would you leave? Yeah. But it just wasn't working for my broader family. Yeah. Right? The salary was great, but all of that stuff, everything you can imagine. And I just let it all go. I was on a fast track to go into a global role, all of this stuff, but I just let it all go because this I needed to get to handle. And I'm proud of that decision. Absolutely. I would make absolutely the same decision again. And in a way, it's worked out well. So we moved. I didn't know where I was going to.
First of all, well done for that. Oh, thank you. Because I don't. I've talked quite a lot about struggling with my work-life balance and things that I'm not particularly good at. But that was a very brave decision, and I think a lot of people who are on fast tracks to global roles, director roles, often don't even contemplate their family. So, sorry, just a slight segue. I just wanted to say, listeners, sometimes in your career, you make choices beyond your career and your progression on where you're going to go, and you need to make a decision that's for other reasons, whether it's a personal choice, something about how you want to develop, or whether it's a family, or could be your parents, for example, if they get old. I know people that have moved back with old parents and things. So, firstly, just with that, well done for that. I think that's very brave and courageous. So, sorry, that was a slight segue. So you went back to Australia.
So I went back. Well, go back to Australia as these things. You make a decision, but it often takes a few months before it all kind of happens. My wife and my daughter moved back first, and I just remember sort of ringing KPMG, who I stayed in. The consultancy, the consultant I work with, and I rang them. I rang my sort of former boss at the time, saying, "Hey, I just quit. We're going to move back to Australia. This is the reason. I take my line manager's sort of words. I'm living what you've told me, putting family first." And he was very proud of the decision I made. And I'll be in touch in a few months when I'm there. But right now, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. There's a lot happening, and I'll take it one day at a time. 2 hours later, he rings back. And he says, "I've just spoken to the partners, and we'd love to have you back. And here is the role. Here is the package in broad terms. You can start any time, But if you're going to be looking, why not come look here? We know you, and we still remember you. We still have, fond memories, all of that. And I was blown away.
This is so important. People who leave jobs, you should leave on good terms.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's people that get into situations where they don't like their jobs and they have to leave. But I would advise anyone that's starting a career, who's progressing through a career, don't burn bridges, because you never know when, as you say, you didn't expect to go back to Australia, but you then needed to and wanted to. and that's what I wanted to just touch base on. So relationships that you built.
Yeah.
That boss wasn't a mentor, was he?
He's a mentor.
He was a mentor as well.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So you had the right person, and so it's astonishing how quickly that all fits into line, and you got in the same role, the same expectations, the same salary. Was that?
Well, no, it was So I had been 5 years out of the organisation, 5 or so years out of the organisation. So it was. I came in with essentially, no drop in salary from what I was in Singapore, if you will. So more senior, a team, different clients, all of that. So it worked out really well. But I reiterate your point there, Mark, about relationships and whether they're mentors or not. I think just that point around relationships held loosely.
Yes.
Now, there's this maxim of it's not what you know, it's who you know. I'm not necessarily saying that's all true and nothing else matters, but there is an absolute truth to it. In the end, we're people, and we resonate with people that we connect with, and that if we're remembered or if they know your value, that carries a lot of weight.
Yes.
So I think for your listeners, in addition to, and I hope this has come through and what I've said, particularly as you start your career, saying yes to everything, giving everything a go to just build your skills. That skill acquisition is important. Equally the same, that network acquisition. Yeah. Just building your networks. And you don't have to be Machiavellian or tactical about it. Exactly. You just don't know where it's going to go. Yeah. But getting out there, learning from people, building networks, not only is it may pay off like it did here, in a great way, but you just grow so much more because like I said, coming into the workplace, you're humbled. You might as well learn. It's from people who are willing to sort of have a conversation with you, who have gone through their own journey. So that's important, and that's in a way paid off so many other times in my life.
So you're back in Australia. I'm going to quickly skip forward, because you stayed in Australia for how long?
18 months.
18 months. Okay, so relatively brief. You then have come over to the UK, which is where you're now. How did that come about?
Great point on this thing. Right. So I never thought I'd go back into the company that I was working with. We went to Australia. We bought a house, so we settled.
Oh, so you really had all your plans were there. Yeah.
And then probably after about a year, I got itchy feet. And
was that because of the consultancy side? Did you feel you were diluted? Did you dilute because you didn't have the same responsibility?
I think a bit of both. But the if there was one overriding factor, it was my time in a global role, in a role where I spanned different geographies. Because working in Australia and doing the stuff that I was doing was all great, and I'm very grateful for the consultancy that brought me in and the team that I worked with. Absolutely. Though it was really, the domestic issues at the time. Yeah. Coming from where I was in Singapore, I was dealing with, 17 or so different countries, and you could deal with 3 or 4 in any one day, and you're traveling all the time. I felt like, gosh, I wasn't finished yet. I didn't feel like I started itchy feet. I kind of there's energy in me that's wanting to sort of really push myself a little bit more, and so and my wife also had in a way, coming back to Australia, began to be a little bit more open to see, okay, what happened in Singapore and the challenges that can't happen again. We need you to be more at home, and we need to work together better. And so we matured as a marriage and as a family as well. My daughter grew up, started growing up at the time, and so we started looking around. I started looking around, and then one of my sort of former bosses in my company sort of got wind that I was interested and looking around. They had gone through some organisational change here in the UK. Brexit happened, interestingly enough. One of my sort of skill sets, if you will, in terms of content, is trade and public policy, and there was a lot of implications that the business needed to think through, as a number of other businesses as well. So they gave me a call. And they said, look, we know you're out of the company, but everyone still remembers you. So to the theme, everyone still remembers you. We're looking at a few things, not certain yet, but would you ever be interested in coming back? Now, if not, we'll rule you out.
Okay.
But we just want to. This might take a while.
Yeah.
Right? This would have been 6-7 months before I actually sort of moved. So it was quite a long period of time.
Yeah.
And I was looking at other things. I was starting to interview for other jobs as well. I said, okay, why not? Why not? Yeah, let's. And for my family life, which I needed to, that had to be yes. Yeah. That had to be a yes for the family life. Yeah. My wife was open to it, and 6 months later, a number of interviews later, we were flying to the UK. And so it came about again by way of relationships, by way of reputation, by a good reputation I left, of what I left when I left the company, and people really vouching for you. Now, I competed with others here in the UK and Europe who sort of went for that job. They open posted it, but I had a lot of sponsorship internally.
Right.
And that's really important.
Yeah.
That theme of networks is
theme of networks, relationship building,
and obviously
keeping in contact, and obviously. But I think what I've listened and learned from you today is that every relationship you have, whether it's you never know when you might need someone, or you might need to speak to someone, getting more information. So that's been very fascinating. So you do a global role now.
I do.
So that obviously means travel.
Yes.
Now, I know I don't do a lot of travel, but what the travel I do know is that I spend most of my time in the office and the hotel. The whole glamorous ideal of you being able to fly to California and have the evenings available to socialise, or it doesn't really happen. Is that your experience as well?
Yes, absolutely right. These days, companies are definitely first. I think it's the way I am, but also by design in terms of travel. Maybe back in the day, you could do all of that, but today, costs of travel and what individuals, professionals do are rigorously kind of looked at by companies. So they need to get that return on investment. So there's a bit of discipline there. Yeah. So I think that makes it a little bit harder. But also, you're there to do work, right? Yeah. So, and now I have a family. I don't like to kind of extend when I travel to a place. Yeah. I don't like to extend it any longer than I have to. So, for example, my most recent sort of long haul trip was a trip to Mexico. Yeah, I literally stayed for 2 nights. Now that is a 13-hour trip. Yeah, nice. So you didn't even bother adjusting. I needed to do the meetings that I needed to do, which were important. Needed to be face to face. As I love technology, so Zoom, Skype, and all of that. You get a lot out of that, but there's just the intangible quality. There's still something, the white in their eyes. Exactly right. Yeah. So, and as you say, Mark, that was literally hotel and office, airport, and perhaps a restaurant for a meal. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And back on the plane home, I was back Saturday afternoon, so I could spend the weekend, at least part of the weekend, with the family. So it isn't as glamorous, but still, you get to see parts of the world and all of that, and you learn and you pick up from your local teams, how things sort of operate.
Yeah.
You can't immerse yourself, but it's what I do. It's what I enjoy. I get a lot of value personally from it, and yes, so that's the kind of life that I have at the moment, working life.
Right. Right. So we're just the last couple of questions.
Yes.
We're just going to wrap up here. So the first thing is, where do you see yourself in 10 years' time?
Where do I see myself in 10 years' time? Oh, gosh. That's...
UK, first of all? Australia? Another country?
Potentially. We're as a family, my wife and I work in partnership. We're equal partners in this. So as long as we remain kind of open-minded to opportunities, both professionally and personally, we can really be anywhere.
Okay.
In 10 years' time, from a career point of view, I love to always be challenged. So that's hugely important, this point around growth. Particularly now I kind of manage a team and I have this global role, the importance of, building my leadership in the enterprise.
Okay.
So an enterprise leader impacting an organization in a bigger and broader way. That's what I'd like to keep going. So, the top of my game, if you will, whatever that looks like, whether it's working for a large organization or others, I like having a global role. The reach and influence. In any one day, I could be dealing with 4 or 5 countries. You're at a video conference with one part of the world, you're dealing with an issue in another part of the world. I enjoy that. In terms of, go back to geography, who knows what will happen here in the UK politically, but notwithstanding, and the world is sort of volatile, where there's volatility, there's opportunity. So that's the mindset that I always have. What can I learn? What can I gain from this for me and my family? So wherever those opportunities are, we'll be pretty flexible.
So that's great. Thank you. Just wanted to, something we've talked about outside the podcast is your morning routine. So I'd just like to sort of jump on to that. So just give us a brief explanation of what time do you wake up? What do you do in the morning before you go to work?
Yeah, no worries. So generally, and this includes weekends, I'm up sort of between 5 and 5:30. I don't sleep as much. I'd love to sleep more, but for some reason it's just that, 5 to 6 hours. Anything above 6 is fantastic. So get up. I will meditate first. So most recently, I've gone straight to meditation. I used to have a cup of coffee first and then meditate, but this year I've gone straight to meditation. So I'll meditate for about 10-15 minutes or so. Mm-hmm. Then it's sitting down with a cup of coffee, and on my iPad I reflect on my goals, what are my strategic priorities, and this is across 3 different areas of my life.
Okay.
So it's not just work. So goals, strategic priorities, enablers. So the 3 areas that I have is first myself, because I think getting the basics and the foundations from a health point of view, my mindset, my values and principles is hugely important. How I show up. Then my family. Am I showing up the right way, thinking through where we are and what are some things that I need to be doing better, and then in a way my career and vocation, so in the workplace. Recently I've been adding to that in terms of my broader impact on the world. As we all need to be humble, because how much can we really control, but what am I doing to leave, I guess, a positive impact, whether it's in the environment, what have you. So I literally, on my iPad, I have these things written down, and I will review them every day, the same words, and I update them every quarter.
Okay.
I then do a big kind of update at the end of every year.
Yeah.
And you talk about being a corporate man through and through. The financial year for many corporates ends on June 30, starts 1 July.
Yeah.
So my end of year review is coming up for myself across these sort of various areas. So I spend probably 15 to 20 minutes just doing that. There's then a chunk at the end where I will jot down any notes. So you've heard in, whether it's other podcasts or techniques around sort of journaling.
Yeah.
This is sort of my version of it. If there's anything kind of in my mind that I need to get out, I will sort of write it down or pen it, and that's sort of 5 minutes, just whatever's sort of bottling in my mind.
Yeah.
And then it's, I suppose, a number of affirmations or things that I say to myself to set myself up for the day. And so that whole process from waking up, meditation to that time can be anything up to 45 minutes. And that's why I get up so early, because before my daughter gets up, before the family sort of starts to wake. And then I'll try to get to work reasonably early as well. So that's important for me, Mark. It grounds me for the day. Now, whether does that have any material impact if I didn't do it? I don't know. It probably does, because what I do know is that when I don't do it, so I'm not saying I I pretty much do it every day, but whether it's travel or somehow an emergency or something happens, sometimes you can't do it, and I do get a bit thrown off. So that's an important routine for me. And I think one important part of a thing around, we didn't talk about this, I have goals, I have objectives, but what I found most helpful for me in recent years is having habits, systems and rituals. And in fact, focusing on that, getting the right habits and systems naturally lead to your goals. Yeah. So so having that discipline in the morning is hugely important.
Good. All right. So if people wanted to find you, where's the best place for them to reach out to?
I'm not that active, to be perfectly honest, on social media. I don't have a website, but you can search my name, Wilson Del Socorro, on LinkedIn. I have a Twitter handle, W Del Socorro, but again, not very active on it. Okay. Barely on Facebook these days. But otherwise, perhaps LinkedIn. Flick me a message on LinkedIn, and that's one I regularly sort of look at, but not active, but I look at.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Wilson. So that's it. That's the wrap up. So my name's Mark Hayward from the Absolute Business Mindset podcast. If you'd like to find me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. Instagram, Mark J. Hayward. Twitter, Mark Hayward 169. Also, there's the website, which is absolutebusinessmindset.com. You can reach out to me. I'm trying to promote at the moment business consulting. So if you've got any questions or you'd like to get my ear and speak to me, there's ways of doing that on the website. And basically, just thank you very much. I appreciate the time. If you can give me any feedback on iTunes or Spotify, wherever, that would be fantastic as well. So thank you very much, and I'll speak to you soon.